The last couple of weeks has had a lot of big news surface in the tech world. So at WWDC, Apple brought out iOS 14, macOS Big Sur, new watchOS 7, and a lot of other features to their product lineup, with the big news really being their transition to Apple Silicon. And I'll come to that later in the video, but we've also had a lot of big news from AMD about Ryzen 3000 XT chips. So the 3600 XT, 3800 XT, and 3900 XT, where you'll get slightly better boost clocks and base clocks depending on the chip on those chips. So better for overclocking and better for just getting the peak performance from their current architecture. And then NVIDIA, we've gotten a lot of news about RTX 3000, specifically some performance numbers on the RTX 3080, which are both intriguing and also possibly bad news for consumers when it comes to the competitiveness in the graphics card market. But back to Apple news with their full final statement regarding Apple Silicon. So it's been rumored for quite a long time that Apple will be moving to ARM-based CPUs in their Mac lineup. So everywhere from the MacBook, MacBook Pro, where the MacBook Pro should be the first model that we see by the end of this year with this Apple Silicon chip. So full ARM-based CPU rather than the x86-based Intel processors. And we should even see these chips in their desktop models, so the iMac and even the iMac Pro. But what's really interesting about Apple Silicon, the development surrounding this news, is what it means for Intel. And Apple's been using Intel CPUs in their entire Mac lineup for over the past decade, and there's pretty much always been some thermal concerns and more recently power usage concerns when it does come to the Intel-based CPUs. And with Intel sort of lagging behind in the development of their processor architecture, still stuck at that 14 nanometer architecture, slowly moving to 10 nanometer and eventually 7 nanometer, Apple has decided to sort of just cut ties with Intel as a supplier. And I think a lot of the thermal issues can be attributed to the Mac-based design itself, especially seen in the newest 2020 MacBook. There's just a fan in the laptop and a heatsink in the laptop with zero connection between them. So, I mean, a lot of it can be attributed to Apple, but Intel hasn't really made enough gains where Apple would be sort of stuck with continuing to use their CPUs in their product. So they decided to finally move ahead with the same ARM-based architecture that they've been using in their iPhones and iPads for plenty of generations of both those devices, and sort of scale it up to their Mac lineup. And when it comes to ARM and when it comes to Apple Silicon, we should see way better power utilization when it comes to these chips. I mean, an iPad and iPhone can last pretty much all day on a minimal battery. So if you can take the power of an iPhone or an iPad, scale it up to a Mac or a MacBook level, and then be able to cram a full-size laptop battery, of course, you're now powering a larger screen, a keyboard. You're powering a little bit more, but at the same time, you should be able to see a lot longer battery life and a lot less heat output on these ARM-based Apple Silicon products that Apple is going to release starting at the end of this year with the MacBook Pro 13-inch. So Apple has said that they're still going to release some Intel-based Macs, most likely in their higher-end lineups. So sort of like the iMac Pro, they're still going to continue to use Intel, probably Intel Xeons, and some higher-end Intel chips in those devices, and then sort of slowly bring in ARM and the Apple Silicon into some of their lower-level laptops, like the MacBook Pro 13-inch and the MacBook. So we should be able to get our hands on a ARM-based, Apple Silicon-based MacBook Pro 13-inch before the end of the year, so we can see what the performance looks like, what the battery life looks like, and what the overall macOS Big Sur overall ecosystem looks like on ARM versus Intel. And based on Apple's release, developers should be able to get their hands on a developer kit. So it's pretty much just going to be a Mac Mini with an iPad processor in it, but the same architecture, the same structure is going to be used on the Mac product line, which makes you kind of wonder why you couldn't just put macOS on an iPad. But at the same time, it should be quick development and quick changeover for developers to be able to convert their Intel-based applications to ARM-based. And along with the Apple Silicon announcement, Apple also announced Rosetta 2 and Universal 2, which should make the transition from x86-based applications that are currently on Apple's Intel-based Macs to their new Apple Silicon-based Macs. So that transition should be pretty smooth, and they said it was only going to take around 2 years to fully complete and get all the applications completely converted over. And they've already started with Microsoft Office as well as Adobe's Creative Cloud. So a lot of those applications that the majority of users are using today on their Apple products will be supported on the first rollouts of their ARM-based Macs. And another big piece to this Apple transition to Apple Silicon and ARM-based CPUs is TSMC, or Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, the same company that produces AMD chips, as well as some Broadcom chips and plenty of other company chips as well. They are most likely going to produce these new Apple ARM CPUs for their Mac products. They've been producing iPhone chips and iPad chips as well. And that's really where the big change between ARM and just TSMC's process versus Intel's process is that TSMC already has a 5 nanometer process pretty much waiting to go, whereas Intel is still trying to get their 10 nanometer process off the ground. So this could really be the first step for 5 nanometer ARM chips for the new lineup of Apple Macs. And this 5 nanometer process should allow for way better performance over the Intel-based competitor chips, while also having better power utilization and better thermals. So just being able to cram more transistors onto the chip with this 5 nanometer process should be able to have way better performance than what Intel is currently able to produce. And that was seen with AMD Ryzen 3000 chips, just the 7 nanometer process compared to Intel's 14 nanometer process. There was a much bigger jump both in core count and just overall performance of the CPUs. So it'll be very interesting to see what Apple Silicon has in store for Mac users, but only time will tell. And hopefully before the end of the year, we get to see a nice glimpse of what Apple Silicon has in store for all the macOS users out there. And some other big news in the tech industry came from NVIDIA. So someone found on TimeSpy results from a supposed RTX 3080, which completely destroyed a Founders Edition RTX 2080 Ti and even an RTX Titan. So the performance improvements that we were expecting with the 3000 series RTX cards is sort of being confirmed at this point with this leak of the RTX 3080 results. So we should see some really, really good improvements when it comes to graphics performance with the next generation of RTX cards. But at the same time, NVIDIA is sort of killing off the competition, and there was already lacking competition, really only AMD, and pretty much in the lower end price categories with their 5700 XT and 5600 XT. And hopefully Navi 2 has something to say about that when AMD releases those graphics cards. But for the time being, RTX 3000 will most likely be possibly priced higher than RTX 2000 series cards without any competition really at those higher price ranges. NVIDIA can pretty much charge whatever they want and get away with it. So hopefully there's some competition soon in the graphics card world. But for right now, Team Green and NVIDIA are sort of dominating the space. Performance is only increasing from their perspective. And yes, that is a good thing for gamers, video editors, anybody who's utilizing the power of their graphics card. But at the same time, competition is what drives prices down. And with the lack of competition at those higher performing card tier levels, we're only going to see prices rise. So with all the news coming out this week in the tech industry, I'm really interested to see what happens later this year. We'll finally hopefully get the release of RTX 3000, see what those prices look like. We should also have the Apple MacBook Pro 13-inch come out with their Apple Silicon-based processors. So we should, at the end of the year, hopefully get a lot of answers to our questions. But for right now, it seems like bad news for Intel, good news for TSMC and NVIDIA, but only time will tell. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so we can finally hit that 1,000 subscriber mark. And if you have any questions, any comments, be sure to leave those below. And I will see you in the next one.